Hi, this is Edward Headington with the Los Angeles Press Club. It's November 9th, and that means that it's the RFK panel discussion on the life and legacy of Robert F. Kennedy. We've got three great panelists and a moderator. Let me tell you a little bit about them. Paul Schrade, Ed Guthman, and Rick Tuttle, and the moderator is Dan Blackburn. And also joining us in the audience is the producer of the one-act play of RFK, Winship Cook. It's going to be a great event. Let's go right now with some interviews of the panelists.
Be here with you at the LA Press Club. Looking forward to the panel on the life and legacy of Robert Kennedy. A good friend of mine, a horrible loss to me, his family, and so many Americans, and to the country.
Well, I've got Guthman, and my relationship with Bob Kennedy starts back in 1956, actually. And, I was a reporter on the Seattle Times, and he came out because we had investigated the Teamsters, and he was in there doing labor racketeering. I covered the hearings, and we became friends. And when he became Attorney General, he called me up one day, and he said, "I want you to be my press secretary." And I said, "Okay, I will." And but he said, "Don't you want to come back and talk about it?" I said, "Sure, I'll come back and talk about it, but I'll do it." It was a privilege and a pleasure, and always a challenge to work for Bob. Everything was right out in the open, straight up, he was a great leader. And tragedy that he died. Had he probably having won California, he had a good chance to become president of the United States. He would have got the Democratic nomination. And two things would have happened if he had become president in 1968. The Vietnam War would have ended in 1969. No Watergate.
Hi, I'm Rick Tuttle. I'm here tonight as part of the Robert F. Kennedy panel here at the Los Angeles Press Club. I'll be discussing the Robert F. Kennedy campaign of 1968. I, along with Gary Townsend, was co-chair of Southern California Youth for Robert Kennedy, and we went through that campaign together. Robert Kennedy is a very important factor in my life. He's an exemplar of the nobility of public service and an example to all of us in terms of devoting a life to the good causes which to make us a better society. It's a pleasure to be here.
Dan Blackburn. I'm the moderator for tonight's event at the Press Club on the legacy of Robert Kennedy. I think this is particularly relevant because not only did I know Robert Kennedy well, but I covered him as a reporter all the way through his campaign for the Senate and through his presidential race. And I am convinced that of all the segments of our society that was influenced by Robert Kennedy, the journalism core of this country, particularly those who cover politics, but beyond that too, those who cover the issues involving the disadvantaged, those who cover racial injustice and the rest, were all influenced by him in one way or another. And as a matter of fact, the Robert F. Kennedy Journalism Awards program is now second only to Pulitzer in the number of participants and awards that it's given and the funding and all the rest of it. So his influence has lived on for many, many years afterward and continues to influence journalists every day. When he was not long after he was elected senator, there was a transit strike in New York. And it was not one of his finest moments, actually, in the way he handled that to start with. And I did a piece that was, I think I can honestly say, pretty critical. And I was walking across the grounds of the Capitol, and he was coming the other way, and I thought to myself, uh-oh, I'm going to hear about this. And all he said, he stopped and said, "How are you?" And all he said to me, he says, "Dan, did you really have to write it that way?" And I looked at him and I said, "Senator, I didn't think I had a choice." And he just laughed and said, "Well, that's fine," and went on. I can tell a whole lot of other candidates and people in public life who would have gone off on you for about 15 minutes of nonstop tirade. Where do you think the legacy is?
Well, I think I think it's a question of how much you knew about him. I think that people that knew him, the legacy is of a high-ranking public official who told the truth, who was going to do what he thought was the right thing to do to solve the problem of, it didn't make any difference what it was. If he confronted it and he had to do something, he would try to do something about it. And I think that's part of the legacy that he leaves behind. And someone who effectively opposed organized crime and labor racketeering. And he made a major impact on our country that I think has stayed, it's not always, but it's had a long-lasting impact.
Robert Kennedy was supposed to call Cesar Chavez and ask him to go on the delegation. Jess Unruh called me. I was in Detroit at the time of the National Board meeting, the UAW, and Jess Unruh, who was teaching at Rutgers at that point, who was chair of the Kennedy delegation, called and said, you know, what's with Chavez? Is he going on the delegation or not? And I said, well, you know, he doesn't want to really get into party politics. And this means he has to make that kind of commitment to the party. And he's in favor of Robert Kennedy. Well, I said, well, Bob Kennedy was supposed to call him today and find out. So within minutes, I was able to get Bob Kennedy at home. And I said, what happened in your conversation with Cesar Chavez? He said, well, he sounded so sick and so weak. And you know, I said, I was out there for the end of the fast. He said, I didn't have the heart to ask him. I know he's going to have a problem with AFL-CIO President George Meany. I said, like I'm having with Walter Reuther at the board meeting. And
this is the ruthless Robert Kennedy.
Well, I said to him, I said, this doesn't sound like the ruthless SOB. And I talked it out in that way that you're supposed to be. And there was this pause, and I thought it was a little over the top. And then he laughed. He said, just don't tell him that.
Ruthlessness is another person's toughness on behalf of people who are underdogs. Be it Ralph Nader, and that who was then an underdog figure.
Very much, yeah.
And being spied upon and sabotaged, as I recall, in that period. Later documented in plenty of court records. Or let's go back from the friends of that sheriff we were talking about earlier, 10 minutes ago. They would see Robert Kennedy as ruthless. From the point of view of the United Farm Workers and the thousands and thousands of farm workers who were getting pushed around all the time by people like that sheriff, they would see him as one tough guy on their behalf.
And compassionate. And something we don't see anymore. I wish this was something that was a legacy, but we just don't see enough of it anymore. Of one person standing up saying, we can make a difference, and we will make a difference. Now join me and step forward and let's do it. All too often now, what you see instead is a group of people sitting around in a circle trying to figure out what they can do that will make themselves look good, and if there's some positive fallout, so much.
There was a lot of interest in that kind of vitality and that energy to want to do something and to solve it now, and obviously his words that were so eloquent. And then we had young elementary school students who came, because we used to do student performances on Wednesday, and we had young kids who were 10, 11, and 12.
That's the show. We hope you enjoyed it. Let me close with one of the quotes that Dan Blackburn shared with us. And this is actually one of the quotes that Kennedy closed with at most of his speeches in 1968. He paraphrased George Bernard Shaw. Some men look at things as they are and ask why. I dream of things that never were and ask why not. Have a good night. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time at the LA Press Club.